Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind. Remember to subscribe to our free podcast so you won't miss any of our illuminating content. Here is episode 186.
What I'm trying to do is take the teachers and say, teachers, this institution is failing you and your market is leaving. If you want to continue having an impact on these kids' lives, you need to get yourself out of these institutions. Stop supplying this public service because it's not a service.
Benjamin Franklin once said, "Do not curse the darkness, rather light a candle instead." If you're ready to set your mind on fire, then prepare yourself for the Luminous Mind with your host, Rebecca Bowman.
Today's fire starter is Thomas Bogle. Thomas is an independent educator teaching courses in economics, entrepreneurship, and political philosophy. He and his wife are both former certified public school teachers who chose to homeschool their 7 children. After 7 years of teaching in the public school system, Thomas left public education to develop the Free Market Educators Association, a professional development organization for freelance educators working outside the traditional learning institutions. He is also a program advisor for Praxis, which is awesome, and a member of the Foundation for Economic Education Faculty Network. Welcome, Thomas.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have you. I think Thomas has a very niche, unique business model, and I'm really excited to learn more about how he's helping educators work outside of that traditional system. But before we get into any of that, will you please tell our audience a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, certainly. So I like to call myself a recovering public school teacher, but really it's true. As I shift from the public education realm into more private, direct-to-consumer education model, I really do have to go through and break myself of bad habits. So I got into education, not necessarily because I was passionate about working with kids, but because I was passionate about teaching. In many other jobs that I'd had before this, I found that the parts of the job that I really enjoyed were where I was able to train and to coach and to mentor other employees along the way. So education was actually a second career for me. I jumped in, and as I'm getting into studying education, I made the mistake of going to graduate school to get a master's degree in education. Now, when you have to spend more money to get the certification than you're going to make doing the job, it's not a good financial decision. But that's neither here nor there. I'm studying education, and what do I want to teach? Well, my background is in business and marketing. So there's always that, but it's an elective course. So along the same time, I started studying economics, because in Arizona, where I'm located, there at least is a requirement for a 1 semester economics course for all public high school students. So as I'm learning education and education theory and philosophy, but at the same time studying economics. And that's when I start to discover folks like Friedrich Hayek, Ludwig von Mises, and these ideas of kind of emergent order and distributed knowledge, public choice theory, and how decisions are made with public goods. All of that stuff really played into what I was doing in my classroom. So for me, I started teaching in a public school. Great school, loved working with the students. The more and more I studied it, I go, this really isn't the ideal learning environment. I'm trying to teach these kids entrepreneurship, and it's all about taking risks. It's all about, if you do make a mistake and you fail, there's an instant market feedback that's letting you know that you did something wrong. And all of those things were really far removed from my classroom. And I had set up projects in my classroom that I thought I'm trying to replicate the entrepreneurial environment, the business world. Students would start a business, They'd have to write a business plan, develop a product, put together a marketing campaign, and they'd actually, make their products, sell them, make actual money. I didn't even make them pay me taxes or anything. Missed opportunity on my part.
Exactly.
But I would do all this stuff and I think, yeah, this is awesome. They're getting this really good simulation of what it's like to be an entrepreneur. And I slowly came to the realization that they were not getting the lessons that I thought they were getting. In fact, what they were learning was almost antithetical to what I was trying to teach them. They were learning that entrepreneurship was a fun game to play. They were learning that entrepreneurship is a series of step-by-step instructions that a teacher tells you what to do and when to do it and what time you have to meet these deadlines. And I realized that I was damaging these kids and really not just not preparing them to be entrepreneurs in this world, but teaching them a false sense of entrepreneurship. So they thought they were prepared and they're not. A lot of this comes from the institutional constraints that are put on us in the public school system. I have to have grades. And so because I have to have grades, I have to give assignments and I have to have deadlines. And all of these things, it's just so I can put a grade on their transcript, were totally wrong with what I was really trying to teach them. And it was towards kind of the last few years that I started teaching. My sister was involved with an organization in Utah, in Lehi, Utah, called the George Mueller Academy. I'm not sure what their current model is like, so I can't necessarily put a plug in for them right now. But what they had done is they had created an education market. They had essentially built a homeschool co-op or a group of homeschool students and parents where a parent could offer a class and they would just say, this is the class that I want to teach. And there was a fee associated with the class. And, students, parents could register for the class. They'd pay a fee. I mean, it was almost like a college type model.
Yeah.
But anyone who wanted to, who was loosely affiliated, or if they knew someone in this co-op, could offer a class. And I thought that's a really cool, innovative model. There's a lot to be done to expand this. And I bet that there's more than just this one in Lehi, Utah going on. I bet there's examples of this going on all over the country, but they're not networked. They're not communicating with each other. So I actually was able to offer an economics course through them. And it was online, which is not my favorite way to teach. I don't enjoy online instruction, and I'll just be upfront about that. But that got me started doing independent classes. And I thought, this is phenomenal. If I can really build a career doing this, there's no reason why I have to keep myself stuck in the school system, especially as the school was getting more and more restrictive as to what I could teach and how I had to teach, when I had to teach it.
I was going to ask if you were getting in trouble because I never learned about any of those economists until I left public school. So I was like, how is he doing that?
Well, I was fortunate to get myself in very early with the Foundation for Economic Education, with the Institute for Humane Studies, and be able to network with many of the academics who are in those organizations or affiliated with those organizations. And I would often tell my students, the most valuable thing that I can offer you as a teacher is not the knowledge that I'm giving you right now, because that's available in any book, website, Learn Liberty, YouTube video, whatever. The most valuable thing that I can offer you is access to my network, to the people that I know, to the organizations who know me, who I've built up a positive, trusting relationship with. But in so doing, I was also able to bring amazing resources back into my classroom. So Foundation for Economic Education would send me copies of iPencil every semester that I would distribute out to students. So my students are reading and at least being exposed to these ideas. And it's kind of funny because for a long time, I justified what I was doing in the public schools by convincing myself, if I wasn't here doing this, some other teacher is going to be in here teaching them something worse.
Yeah.
At least they're being exposed to these ideas so that hopefully I'm planting some seeds and some of it sprouts later on. We'll see. But I kind of justified that until I realized really in just my last year of teaching, there was a couple big events that happened that year that were kind of, the straw that broke the camel's back for me. But when I had some of my students who came to me and said, "You are one of the most influential teachers I have ever had. You have opened my eyes to how the world works." And then they would jump in and get really involved with political activism that was 100% opposite to everything that I tried to teach them. I realized that this was not about them learning the lessons I was trying to teach.
Yeah.
That was pure cult of personality.
Well, and sometimes I wonder too, like the public school system is a very socialist. I mean, it's all based off of socialism it's a taxation type program that people are just forced to pay into, all of the stuff that goes with it. I mean, everything. And
right. It's socialized education.
Yeah. And I do remember thinking as a child, I went through the system and it's like, well, if it works for school, then it should work for everything else. And I really think that, as I've grown up, I've come to see that when you're in that system, it sets you on a path to accept that as, this is the way everything should happen. And it wasn't until, I say I'm an accidental homeschooler, but it wasn't until I started homeschooling that I started really thinking like, maybe that was wrong, but I think it's really difficult. And I say this to parents all the time, they're just shocked when their kids come out and all of a sudden they're spouting communist or socialist ideas. And they're like, wait a minute, I haven't been teaching my kid that, but they've been in that system for 12 years. I mean, is that kind of your thinking of that with your students?
Yeah, that's definitely one aspect of it is they're being inundated on all sides. I would really feel bad. So my entrepreneurship course that I would teach is partnered with one semester government class. And I always felt really bad for the students that would have me first semester and then take government second semester, because after they'd had my course, I'd essentially destroyed everything that they thought they were going to learn in their government class. Because for the students who had government first semester and then me second semester, they'd come in with these ideas. Oh, this is what the government does. This is how the government works. And I'd very quickly introduce them to government failures as opposed to market failures and the relationship between the two. And they would just like their eyes would open and they would, you'd see the light bulbs. And I loved that. And so I felt bad for the government teacher who had my students, because they would come to her class and instead of just accepting and regurgitating whatever she told them, they had the tools to actually challenge her. And a few of them got themselves in some pretty serious trouble for challenging her a bit too openly.
Wow.
But yeah, they're getting this day in, day out for 12 years. And if you look at, I don't want to get too hung up on like the political side of things, but honestly, like if you look at how public educators vote, if you look at the ideas that they hold, they're like 80% moderate democratic socialists, right? If you think that teachers don't bring bias with them into the classroom, like, I'm sorry, that's part of education. If you're using a person to convey information, then that person is part of the message.
Yeah, they will swing it the way they need to or want to.
Right. And or use certain resources and leave out others, or only present one aspect of a story and then present a very watered down alternative version. Then there are these institutional barriers that stand in the way. Like you said, the entire institution is socialized education, because now for me, one of the biggest struggles is trying to convince people, hey, markets in education work. They work all over the world and they do a phenomenal job. They say, but what about the public schools? Who's going to educate our kids?
Yeah. Or what about the poor?
What about the public lettuce? What about the public shoes? Like, who's going to shoe and clothe and feed your kids? All these things seem to happen the same way. Well, but what about the poorest of the poor? Well, what about these other charitable organizations that do this? And then we can get into crowding out effect, where there would probably be much more available in the private sector if government didn't jump in and try and compete.
Yeah.
So with what I'm doing with the Free Market Educators Association is I saw too many of my peers in the public school system who were honestly very good teachers. All politics aside, they were very good at their craft. And they were getting fed up with how rigid and overly structured and testing oriented the system was becoming, and they were leaving. I actually saw several teachers chased out mid-semester because they were not willing to bend to the constraints that were being put on them by the bureaucrats.
Wow.
And I thought that's a real shame. I wouldn't want to take this person's class, but someone does. And there should be a way that this person who is now leaving the public education system can still go out and teach. And they don't have to, it's like every teacher, they say, okay, I'm done teaching. I got burnout on teaching. And then they go get into real estate. And there's nothing wrong with getting into real estate, but you have skills, you have experience, you have expertise. And if you're good at it, the market wants your services.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, if you look around, people want education. They want their kids to be educated. They want to be educated themselves.
Yeah. Well, and that's what, I mean, I love how you talked about that there would be more choices, that maybe it wouldn't be as expensive. A lot of people say, well, teachers wouldn't get paid a whole lot because, you see that now where some of these private school teachers are really not making as much as some teachers can in the public schools because, it's a taxation thing, whereas the private school teacher has to rely on, people being interested in coming, which it's harder to do when there's a public entity. But I think you're right in that we could have teachers that are very well paid. I love the website, and I cannot think of the name of it, but where teachers are putting on different things that they've made. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Pay teachers.
Teachers pay teachers. And some teachers are becoming millionaires just because they've created such great material that other teachers want.
No, some people have left the classroom entirely because they found it far more profitable to spend their time creating and curating content and then making it available for sale rather than teaching in the classroom.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I mean, there's definitely a demand for these services. And, if you look over in a lot of Asian countries, especially Hong Kong and South Korea, they have what they call their shadow education system, which is really simply a network of private tutors. And some of them are millionaires. They have billboards. They have marketing campaigns and budgets that they spend to promote their classes and their one-on-one tutoring sessions. And don't get me wrong, it's very expensive. And the primary reason they do it is because the Asian education system or the Far East Asian education systems are very test driven. So there is a bit of skewed incentives there, but the model still stands. If you want to make a lot of money as an educator, the public school system is not going to enable you to do that.
Yeah. What
it's going to do is going to give you a safe path. And I think that's what we see is a lot of educators don't have the entrepreneur's mindset.
Oh, yeah.
And they don't want to have the entrepreneur's mindset because that's work. That's capitalism, right?
Yeah. I've been in the realm long enough to hear a lot of teachers like, oh, well, we don't want to make money off of education, that's wrong. And we do it because we love it. But really it's a very safe place for them to go. I've talked to a lot of different people about starting these learning centers, and all of them are former educators that have been like you, that are tired of the system and see a better way to educate their students. They actually felt like they were doing harm to them with the educational model that's out there right now. But a lot of them really struggled. One of the things they struggled with is when they started this learning center is marketing and business and all of that stuff. And I thought it was interesting just thinking about that is the one profession. So you're in college and I've even had different colleges. I'm close to a private college up here, private religious college in Idaho that one of my friends went through, and they weren't allowed to use a private school for their teaching certification, of the classroom work. And then they're never taught business classes. They're never taught anything. It's just, if you're in that major, it's just assumed or expected that you're going into, the public realm where you don't have to do any marketing. Do you feel like that's been like a challenge to you when you're working with some of these teachers, is teaching them how to market themselves and how to create businesses like this?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. In fact, the first hurdle is trying to convince them that they ought to. And then I kind of chuckle when I remind them. I say, you already do this. For me working in the public school system, every year we would have a week or so when our morning announcements, the school would show videos where teachers would promote their elective classes that they taught. And of course, every teacher wants to promote their electives courses because these are the classes that I like to teach.
Yeah.
These are the classes that are fun. And I don't get to teach them unless students sign up. Well, the only difference here is that now you have to actually convince kids not just that the class is going to be fun, but that it is going to be valuable for them, because you're asking them to put money on the line. You're asking them to actually buy into your class. So the first thing is just to convince educators that they're already doing this. They just don't realize that they're doing it because they don't see the money changing hands. The money is already changing hands. They just don't see it. The second thing is, getting them to think with that mindset. And this is really one that changes educational philosophies a lot, is when you have to try to treat your students as customers. I had a piece that Foundation for Economic Education published on, if students aren't the customers, then they are essentially the product being sold.
Oh, wow.
This Facebook users, Twitter users. I'm sorry, but if you're a user of a free service, you are the product that's being sold. It's advertising dollars. So in the public school system, students are the product of the public school system. They're the product that we're selling. And we're selling them for political profit. I mean, it's really disgusting.
I have never really thought about it, but that's very true.
I'll send you a link to the article because with the help of a colleague of mine, who I'll actually mention in a second as well, we went through and put that idea together. So this other colleague who helped me write that paper actually is a professor of education at Eastern Carolina University. And he's doing some really phenomenal things, training new educators who are coming into the world of education. And he and I have had some pretty lengthy discussions about that idea, that the way that colleges of education or teacher colleges are set up, it really is designed to funnel all teachers directly into the public school system. And they really go out of their way to convince you that any of these alternative models are really detrimental and disgusting. I remember when I first learned about Sudbury model education in a curriculum design course that I took, like the way that the teacher presented it to me, I'm like, that's disgusting. I was physically ill because to think that there were actually adults who were treating kids this way. And the more that I've actually studied education, studied, the neurology of the child's developing brain, child psychology, I'm like, wow, it's not necessarily the approach that I would take, but I like a lot of their ideas and I like a lot of their execution. Having a very student-led education model instead of a very top-down, bureaucrat-driven education model, like you've tried to convince me is the only feasible way to go. It really is ingrained in our teacher training colleges. So I'm trying to at least offer some services to counter that, to show that teachers, you really need to set up a personal website, not just one where you show this is our homework assignment for tonight. No, you use that for your school learning management. This is a place for you to showcase who you are as a person, what you contribute to the field professionally, personally, give student and parent testimonials. Your website is a marketing tool. A lot of teachers don't think of it that way. Your social media presence. Teachers must have a social media presence today. And a lot of teachers are kind of jumping on this bandwagon. But if you want to actually be an influencer, not just of kids, but an influencer in the marketplace of ideas, you need to be very active on social media and on the internet. Yeah. And you need to be creating content as well. So that we could go down that rabbit hole for days.
Well, there's so many rabbit holes I'd love to go down. One of the questions before I kind of get into how you feel like your paradigm has changed, but many teachers feel like that maybe if they're not there pushing the kids, I mean, you're talking about how the Sudbury model really disgusted you, that they won't be learning. I mean, what was your experience? I kind of skipped over. I feel so bad I interrupted you and kind of skipped over it. But, you talked about working with these kids in kind of the homeschooling co-op. What was the difference there between maybe some of the students that you had in the public realm versus like your experience you never really talked about, I mean, you just started into how wonderful of an experience that was, but Give me a breakdown of what you think the difference was between those two types of students.
Right. I guess the primary difference that I ran into was motivation. And that was the students in my public school classrooms were generally not there because they wanted to be there. Like, I would always ask them the very first day of the semester, why are you here in this class? Be brutally honest with me. Why are you here? And about 60% of them would say, because my counselor told me I needed the credit. And so it doesn't mean that they're a lost cause at that point, but motivation has a huge impact on learning and on how willing they are to do the different activities or to dive themselves into some of the learning activities that we would do. Whereas the students in these homeschool co-ops, I won't say all of them necessarily wanted to be there. Of course, there were some where the parent signed them up and they're, no, I don't want to do that course. And the parents would make them come. That's going to happen in every situation like this. But usually in a situation like that, I would simply reach out to the parents and say, if they really don't want to be here, it's kind of detrimental to their learning. And the parents would understand and they'd pull them out of the course. So the vast majority of students actually wanted to be there. They wanted to learn. They wanted to be engaged in the activities that we were doing. And they weren't doing it for the grade because I wasn't giving them a grade, right?
Which seems interesting, right? I mean, because like we've heard that if you're not forcing them or if there's not some sort of carrot or whatever, people aren't going to want to learn.
Right. I won't say you've eliminated the carrot. You've just changed what the carrot is, right? The carrot is no longer, here's this grade that's going to go on a transcript that's going to signal that you learned something, right? Because I'm not offering that. I'm not offering you any kind of signal. What I'm offering you is an experience that can lead you to develop knowledge. And so now when you come into my classroom, that's all I have to offer is the experience. Do you want the experience or not? Well, the kids in the public school system couldn't care less about the experience. The kids in these homeschool co-ops or private groups that I taught, that was all they were getting was the experience because I wasn't going to give them a grade. So if they didn't want the experience, they would simply leave, and not just walk away. I'd work something out with their parents, but they would just find another path, find something that worked for them. And so then the kids that were there, they wanted this. They wanted the experience. And so they would come out the other end and say, yeah, look, this is what I learned. This is what I've done. This is what I've created. And they'd almost have this little portfolio to demonstrate their experiences. So my last couple years of teaching, I really realized that one of the things that my students were missing out on was the opportunity to interact with real venture capitalists, real entrepreneurs, real innovators. And so I changed up the game a little bit and I networked with some here in my community. And I offered my students, I said, look, if you want to treat my classroom as an actual launch pad for your business, I can connect you. No, obviously no money can change hands as a result of me, but I can at least connect you and introduce you to some of these people who are really into this. They want to help your dream become a reality. Forget sitting in a classroom in college and saying, well, maybe someday I'll be able to do what I really want to do. I can help you make it a reality today. And in the 2 years that I offered that, not a single student ever took me up on it, even though there were some who had $1 million ideas, easily $1 million ideas. And I even told the kids, I said, look, if you're not going to run with this, I'm going to totally steal this idea from you. I never did, by the way. But, if they wanted to pursue this, I made it very, very easy for them to do so. And they were so ingrained on the idea that they had to go to school, they had to get good grades, they had to get that college diploma, they had to get that degree, right? And that was their only route to career success. Oh my gosh, it kills me. And that was where I really said, I'm doing more damage, or at least I'm contributing to a system that does more damage to these kids than it does good.
Yeah. Wow. That's pretty powerful. Well, tell me, how do you feel like, starting from the beginning to now, how do you feel like your paradigm of education has changed over that time and with that experience?
So I come from this goes even a little bit further back for me, growing up in a very conservative household. I actually went to a charter high school called Heritage Academy. It was, the principal was also the founder of the National Center of Constitutional Studies. And we read the 5,000 Year Leap as a political theory textbook at my school. But it was very much, is actually a pretty rigid structure. And my English teacher would make us memorize these very long ballads, and there was a lot of requirements placed on us. It was a very heavy top-down,
lots of burden.
Education model. But I got a lot out of it because of the type of person that I was and the type of learning that I enjoyed. So I got a lot out of that. And so it was this idea that, wow, those type of educators really made a big difference in my life. That's the kind of educator that I'm going to be. I'm going to give these kids structure. I'm going to show them what to do. And then as I actually got into the classroom and tried to work with them, by the time I was day one in the classroom, my mentality was already, if I treat the kids like adults, they're going to act like adults. Well, the problem with that is that they don't see adult behavior modeled, even in the home, many of them. And so the vast majority of adults don't act like adults these days.
Yeah, that's for sure.
But I did that. From day one, my opinion was that I'm going to be respectful of you as a human being. I am going to treat you as an adult. It had always been my policy. Like, you don't ask permission to go use the restroom. Like, how ridiculous of a thing is that we do? We can communicate non-verbally. You let me know that you're leaving the classroom, and I let you know that I acknowledge that you're leaving. But there doesn't have to be any kind of permission asking. It's so ridiculous. So for me, the biggest way that my perspective has changed is not necessarily with what I would do within my own classroom, but with the kind of hidden curriculum, the subtext of education. And that is the way that schooling itself is organized, the way that you're given these requirements that you have to accomplish, follow this bell schedule, eat when we tell you to eat, go to the bathroom when we tell you to go to the bathroom. And it was the rigidity in that I've really started to push back against in recent years. And then the changing the mentality of, instead of thinking of students as, hey, you're here, I'm in charge, I'm going to tell you what to do, thinking of myself as a producer of educational services, thinking of my students and their parents as my customers, where I have to deliver value, not some future hidden, someday you're going to need to know this, but I have to deliver value to them now.
Yeah.
I have to explain to you right now why you need to know the Pythagorean theorem today and how it's going to make your life better. And so having that mentality, I think, has gone a long way in helping me realize that there is no room for that kind of mentality within the public education realm. Even within like homeschooling. So, my wife and I homeschool, and I'm not going to try and tell anyone how they ought to homeschool their own children. But I always thought it was kind of ridiculous to sit there with your kid in the public school system and just be so fed up and so disgusted by what they were doing in the school system that you had to pull your kid out and bring them home and then try to replicate exactly what the schools are doing. And yet that's really what the vast majority of homeschooling is like. And it's even what the vast majority of private schooling is like. So we're starting to see this kind of revolution in the education world where you're looking at more student-driven education, more of these kind of North Star model, Sudbury model, independent learning centers. I'm very much of the belief that secondary education, or, pretty much from the time our kids kind of develop the self-motivational learning model, is put them in these kind of independent co-working centers where they can work with different teens, even other young adults, on independent collaborative projects, almost like the co-working center that's down the street from my house. This is all the rage now with entrepreneurs and innovators, is to have this kind of open office format and very loosely defined job roles. And I think that is going to become even more prevalent in the coming decades. And so what the school system is doing right now is it's preparing kids for the future that may not have actually existed even 15 years ago. And so we're not even looking at what the work environment or the economic environment is going to look like in 20 or 30 years. The institutions of public education are definitely not preparing kids for what is on the horizon for them.
Before we go on, please listen to these messages. Does the idea of another 4 years stuck in a boring classroom while accumulating tens of thousands of dollars in debt before you can even begin your life seem daunting to you? Let the intellectually stimulating collaborative community of Praxis change your educational paradigm. With Praxis, you don't have to wait to ignite your future. You can begin today. Praxis combines an intensive 3-month professional development program and a 6-month paid apprenticeship with a dynamic growing company and a guaranteed full-time job placement. And the best part, no degree or debt is needed to get started. To get exclusive Firestarter information about Praxis, go to discoverpraxis.com/mind. Welcome back to The Luminous Mind with Thomas Bogle, who's helping teachers to become free market educators. I love kind of how you talked about your homeschool, the homeschooling experience of not being happy, so you pull them out and do the same thing as a parent. And I really think that that's because we are all programmed. I mean, I hate to sound so conspiratorial, but it's really hard. I mean, I feel guilty that I'm not sitting my son down and, going over diagramming sentences or something that I did as a student, even though I've never, ever done that as an adult. I've never had to diagram a sentence, and it's never helped me with writing. And I really am excited to see, what you're talking about is that luckily we're all starting to deprogram ourselves. We're all starting to unschool ourselves or kind of get into that, or what do we call it, deschooling. Where it's becoming more commonplace for us to acknowledge that the system's broken, that it strips the natural learning process that's already innate in the child, and then we strip that away from them, and then we have to try to re-implement that when they leave the school system to be creative. And that's what really is the frustration for a lot of our workplace stuff that you're talking about, is that we've stripped this out and now they're going, okay, we need creative, we need self-motivated, we need problem solvers, all those things. And we've just stripped that out. And so now, we're finally getting to that place of, okay, how can we change this? And that's what I'm excited with your company. Let's kind of dive into that, of what you've been doing. Tell us about your website and maybe some mentoring and how you've really helped others since you've left the traditional setting.
Right. So my main area of focus right now with Free Market Educators Association is to simply send the message for other educators who might be on the cusp of leaving public education, or even for people who really like the idea of getting in and teaching and working with young people, but don't want to go through the process of certification, which can be a really difficult barrier to entry. Just show them, hey, there's an alternative path. Just because you're not going to jump through the hoops of the public education system and all of the government requirements that are tied to that, doesn't mean that, one, you can't develop these skills, both in terms of pedagogy and teaching instruction and understanding different educational philosophies, but also skills on how to market yourself, how to create a course that is both fun and challenging and engaging and really gets the kids learning. And so kind of this double-sided skill set that independent and freelance teachers really need. My primary goal right now is to show them that it's possible, that other people are doing it, that other people are making it work for them, and that the market is ready for them. They are the first movers. They are the innovators in the marketplace, but the market is there. And yeah, they do have to go up against the challenge of free public school, which makes it even more of a necessity for them to really broadcast, hey, I bring value and I bring value now. And so trying to show them using real world examples of other teachers who have done this. So I've had several guest blog posts come on, or guest bloggers come and share their experiences with what they've done. how they've come up with really cool, innovative classes and how to then broadcast them out and reach a market. What do you do when maybe you have this kid who really wants to take your class, but they can't afford your class? Is there a solution to it? So sharing some of these personal experiences that other teachers have had, showing them that this is possible, it can be done, and they can do it too. The second aspect, and this is kind of in the works, I did talk with you off the air a little bit about a project that I'd be working on. So some of this is going to be a much longer term project, and anyone who would like to collaborate with me on this, I'd love to hear from you. But the next phase of this is really very specific how-to guides. It's more than just the abstract, yes, I can do this, but okay, now that you've convinced yourself, you understand, you have this sense of urgency that you want to do it, you believe in yourself. Now, how do you actually go about doing it? And so putting together these very specific how-to guides, giving them instruction on how to implement certain classroom educational strategies, certain instructional pedagogies, but not with a traditional classroom mindset. So I'm not training them to be a classroom educator, right? That's not the goal. They want to go be a classroom educator. There's plenty of people who can help you do that. I want them to come into this with the mindset that these students and these parents are my customers, and I have to be delivering value to them every single day.
Wow. That's pretty cool. So, I mean, it really comes down to you have to deschool them and educate them that it's possible. And then now you're trying to create a framework to give them the step-by-step. Because like I said, even I was in a design field. I even had to take business classes. I know doctors, lawyers, all those people have to take business classes, but the teachers don't have to do that. If you are an education major, you don't have to take a business class. So you're basically providing what their college or whatever left out, correct?
Right.
Is that awesome?
Right. And I have to say, I mentioned a professor friend of mine at Eastern Carolina University. He actually goes out of his way to try to encourage students to have this mindset and also to encourage his colleagues. He's very quickly becoming very influential in his department. And so I'm hoping to see this spread to other programs of education as well, so that even teachers who think, okay, I have to go through traditional government certification programs, as they're going through those programs, at least they're getting exposed to the idea of, hey, there are alternative education models out there. I don't have to just follow this one path. And maybe this one path doesn't actually fit what I want. Where are some other resources that I can go to learn how to choose one of these other paths as well? So it's starting to happen right now. You're starting to see the waves swell. I read someone's blog. This is actually a couple years ago, but it was the idea that if you look at the number of teachers, like public school teachers who right now are choosing to homeschool their own children, it's pretty funny. Staggering.
Yeah.
No, seriously, public teachers homeschool their kids at like 40% more the rate than the general population. That's not an actual statistic, but
so they recognize that there's a problem, but yet, I mean, yeah,
right.
They're just kind of stuck in that.
Right. And so this is the indicator species. You're seeing the waves starting to swell right now. And I really think that in the next few years, you're going to see that wave start to crest. And then the public education system is going to come collapsing down. The question is, what is going to replace it? And so what I'm trying to encourage my friends in public education right now is you've got to innovate or die, because you're on a sinking ship.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
What are your other options?
Yeah, I remember being, way back in my public school choice type stuff that I used to do, some of the lobbying. And when virtual education was coming out, you said you didn't really like teaching online, but it's it's changing what a lot of people think. And I remember some of these teachers, I've been teaching for 40 years and this will never work type of thing.
And I haven't changed a lesson plan in 37.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I was thinking that the sad part is it was changing around her and she was going to be left in the dust because she didn't accept it, because she didn't move on, and because she didn't have those. I mean, if you ever read Who Moved My Cheese, all of a sudden she's in the corner going, wait, there used to be food here. Why isn't it working? Because they didn't acknowledge that this was happening. And I do agree. I think it is on its way down. And the cool thing is we have all these great infrastructures that hopefully we can turn into, private classes and all that for them to use as well. But that's a whole nother topic I'm sure we can discuss. Let's kind of go on maybe what successes that you've seen in your work, people that you've worked with and you've been able to help them change their mindset and then get some sustainable businesses going.
Right. So I was at a conference in Florida just a few weeks ago, or a couple months ago now. And I was speaking to a room full of educators out there. What was really interesting to me was after my presentation, the number of high school teachers or middle school teachers who came up to me afterwards and said, I don't know how you have the audacity to do what you do, but more power to you.
That's awesome. Yeah.
And my response to every single one of them was, you can do it too. Every single one of you guys can do it. And one of them did reach out to me afterwards, a few weeks later, and said, thank you for giving me the courage to open up about these types of views. She said, I don't remember who it was specifically, some relation of hers, her niece or cousin or something like that, was starting the process of going through and getting her degree in education and, jumping through the certification hoops. And she said, you've given me the courage to kind of challenge her on some of these things so that she can become a better teacher down the road. Like that's my whole objective in this, is not to tell people, hey, as a teacher, you're hurting kids. It's to tell people, as a teacher, working within the institutional frameworks that you think you're stuck with, those institutional frameworks are hurting kids. If you step out, you change your mentality, and you can see that there's a better way to do this. And I've had a few people reach back out to me and just let me know, this is phenomenal what you're doing. We really appreciate having our eyes opened to see that this is even a possibility, or to see that we're not crazy in thinking that this is the way that the school system ought to be structured, or that education ought to be delivered. So those are where some of my biggest successes with free market educators have happened, not necessarily directly with helping one person become a millionaire teaching courses online overnight. You can do it. And the platforms that offer the services, they'll offer you the training to go and do that right now. What I've been focusing up to this point is more the mentality, the mindset, changing those hearts and minds and letting people know that there is a better way.
Yeah. Well, and you're perfect for our podcast. I mean, that's what we'd like to do, is to help change that paradigm so people can see something else and think outside their traditional mindset to, have that desire to want to do something else, and to see that it is possible, that there's a whole network of people doing this already. So that's great. Where are you speaking? I mean, I can't imagine. Do universities call you in, or?
This was actually at a conference for economic educators in Florida that was put on in part by the Stavros Center out there.
Okay.
A lot of the places where I've been speaking about this are honestly in not the education circles, but in the economic circles. The primary reason for that is because these are the people who they're familiar with the ideas of Hayekian spontaneous orders or emergent orders. And so it's not shocking to them. It's not scary to them. They go, yes, this is how it can be done. But then many of them also have access to significantly larger networks than I do, and then are able to help me get in touch with the people who can put it into practice on the ground, rather than just, hey, let me tell you about this cool idea I have. Yeah. So reaching out to educators and telling them this directly is much more difficult, because universities don't want to hear this message. Obviously, no one in public education wants to hear this. So I do have to try and be sneaky with how I deliver to that market, and be a little bit more, I don't want to say sneaky. That makes it sound like I'm lying or being deceitful. Just being a little bit more tactful in the way that I craft a message to give to them. focusing more on the mentality and the pedagogy rather than saying burn the system down or the system's going down anyway. You might as well jump ship now while you're ahead.
Yeah.
Right. So be a little bit more tactful with my language there.
Well, and I can see this being a big networking down the road, I guess, and maybe we'll talk about your long-term goals in the future. But that's what, I mean, I think a lot of educators have this in their mindset, like something's not right. You know, they just feel that. But maybe a lot of them feel like they're the only ones that think that, you know, that they're the only ones that go, maybe there is something else, but then think, oh, that's just crazy talk, you know, whereas they're not alone, you know, in that thought. And maybe when we finally get this message out to people that they're not alone, then that is really when it will come down. Like we talked about. I mean, when they go, okay, I'm not the only one, and we know there's something else, and other people are here with me and they see the same thing. I mean, what do you feel like that as far as having that network with teachers?
My economic background in me means that my mind works in supply and demand curves. So the slogan of free market educators is improving supply to meet demand. It's very much this economic way of thinking that infiltrates my mind. But when I look at the school system, the public school system right now, the supply or the demand is students coming in and demanding educational services, right? And demand is already diminishing. Like students are fleeing the public school system in flocks and droves, to the point where a lot of schools are actually shutting down. I mean, we're seeing this a lot in failing districts like Detroit and some of these other inner city districts, where so many students are fleeing public education that they're actually shutting down public schools. What I'm trying to do is essentially the same thing, but from the other side, is take the teachers and say, teachers, this institution is failing you and your market is leaving. If you want to continue having an impact on these kids' lives, you need to get yourself out of these institutions. Stop supplying this public service because it's not a service. In so doing, and actually trying to convincing teachers that it's not very beneficial for them to be in the public school system, it will actually make it easier for them to make a living working outside of it. And so having this network, being able to meet with other teachers who are doing this, being able to feel like they're not alone, but even more importantly, to see that other people can succeed doing it. To me, that is the biggest impact that I can have on the life of an educator, to convince them that they actually have something that is valuable enough that people are actually willing to pay them for it. Because right now, none of them think that they have that. Yeah. They all want to be paid more money, but none of them in their own mind can go out and justify other than, well, I put in a lot of hours. Who cares? I don't care about the amount of hours you work if you're not doing anything productive, right?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to convince them, you actually have something productive to offer. You have something that people want. And right now, the public education system, these institutions, these school districts, administrators, bureaucrats, they are standing in your way. And so if you step outside, you want to set your own hours? Great. You want to develop your own curriculum? Phenomenal. You don't want to offer classes for 18 weeks or 35 weeks. Maybe you just want to do a series of 3 weekend seminars. Great. Do that instead. You know, there's a lot of different ways that you can structure this, and you have the freedom, you have the control, you set your own real potential. I hate it when I use that term because it makes it sound like a ridiculous multi-level marketing scheme. You determine your own potential, right? But it's true, right? Yeah. The amount of effort and the way that you're able to communicate to the market actually does determine how effective you'll be in as an educator in that realm.
That's awesome. I love everything you're saying, and we could go on. And I feel like we kind of talked about, you know, your long-term goals of what you're trying to do with teachers, with networking, but give me the nuts and bolts of that long-term goals.
So I have long been a believer in the phrase criticize by creating, where if I'm going to spend my time to sit and look at a problem that exists and then just complain about it, that's pointless. It's a waste of time, and it just drags everyone down, myself included. If I see a problem, I ought to start building a solution to that problem. So for me, sitting back looking at public education mired in its own political problems, my long-term objectives are to build the institutions and the networks and the frameworks that will eventually completely replace the education model that we've adopted, not just in this country, but in most of the world, where we've taken this idea of education out of the realm of this false public good that people think it is, and start treating it like a skill and a craft and a good, like everything else.
Yeah.
Not everyone has to know everything, and not going to school doesn't mean you're dumb. There's tons of different types of knowledge. In fact, this is a very Hayekian thing, is that it's the type of localized knowledge is what makes the global economy run. But for some reason, we don't value that. We think we have to have these grand scientific truths that are universal and applicable to everyone in every situation. And that's great. I'm all for philosophy and science and things like that, but that's not what makes the global economy function. What makes the global economy function is each one of us in our own location with their own localized and specialized skills and knowledge, tending to the wants and needs of the people in our community in exchange for them satisfying our wants and needs.
Yeah.
That's what makes the global economy go around. And there's no reason why our education system shouldn't mirror and reflect that.
Yeah. Well, I love how you talk about complaining. I mean, you see everyone complaining about it. You see students, you see teachers, you see parents. I mean, there's a lot of complaining, but yeah, let's be the solution to making, something better and changing how this is working instead of complaining about it.
Right.
Do you want to give us any, maybe you have some final parting words for our listeners, and then give us your contact information, how our audience can get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So the little bit of parting information is I want to reach out to homeschool parents and alternative educators, because I'm guessing that's probably the vast majority of your listenership right there, and to encourage them to reach out and expand their network and not be afraid to put together a class that they want to teach and offer it, not just to people in their own little homeschool co-op or in their own little church group. Be open and inviting and bring people in and let people know, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'm going to offer this course. This is how it's going to work. This is what it's going to cost. And then make good on that. And as you start to do it, you will see other people start to do it. And you don't have to be the best of the best to be a pioneer in this field.
Yeah, just take the thing you're passionate about and the thing you have knowledge about, right?
Right. Absolutely. So I know this is going to sound really, really ridiculous, but my kids love playing with Legos. I love playing with Legos. And so I've actually spent a ton of time developing a curriculum to teach entrepreneurship using Legos, building with Legos, prototyping with Legos, marketing with Legos. It doesn't have to be rigid and academic. It can be fun. It can be controversial. It can be scary. It can be experimental. One of my favorite independent educators out there, I'll just call him Mr. C because that's how his students know him. He's put together this course on everything. It can go anywhere. The premise of this is he's going to help his students write their own science fiction novels. In the process of writing their own science fiction novels, they have to become the gods of their own science fiction universe. They have to understand the elements. They have to define the elements. They have to set the laws of physics and the culture and language. And in diving into that and doing all those things, like there's no necessary or not necessarily one specific outcome of this course. Even if the kid doesn't end up with a finished novel, what they go into and what they can learn just in the process is just phenomenal. And it all started because he's like, I kind of want to write a book, but I don't know what to write about. And he's brainstorming with some kids, just some ideas for a science fiction novel. And it stemmed from that. And now it's one of his most sought after courses that he teaches.
Wow.
So you can do it.
Well, it kind of goes back to what you were talking about before, is providing value. I mean, little kids will see, my son would be all over a class with Legos in it. That's providing value to him. But then in the process, he's learning something. He's going through a process, like you said. And even if he doesn't come up with necessarily the final product that you want, he's learned something from that. That's awesome.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then the next thing I would say to the folks out there is, don't think that you have to do this all on your own. A lot of people, when they pull their kids out of the public education system and they think, I'm a homeschooler, I'm going to teach my kids at home, I'm going to do it all. You don't have to do that. There's nothing wrong with the division of labor. There's nothing wrong with finding an expert to teach your kids things that you don't know anything about. Use other people's knowledge, build your own networks and expand these networks, share your networks with other people, because that is how we are going to build these kind of social institutions that are going to replace the very rigid political ones that we all like to complain about right now. So those are the things that I would tell your listeners.
The cool thing about, I think that's just a really bad myth that people have about homeschooling, is that you're all by yourself and that, you're just home teaching every subject to your child. But really, true successful homeschooling parents realize they can't do it on their own, and that they're outsourcing a lot of, the education of their children. They're just giving their children the freedom. They're really not even homeschooling. They've just pulled them away from school. They've given them that freedom.
I much prefer the term just alternative education, but you try and tell people that and they're totally lost.
Yeah, they don't understand it.
So you're like, we homeschool.
Yeah,
exactly. But
exactly.
I agree. I think the vast majority of people know that, and who are successful, they see that and they do it. But from what I see in a lot of these kind of social media groups, especially with newer homeschoolers, is just, they think that they have to take it all on their own, and they don't. Okay. Yeah. Build your network, rely on your community, ask and ready to deliver when you're asked. That's how we build community, right? Yeah. I could go on for hours about how for generations, our communities have been defined by our schools, by these government-run institutions. We've literally put the government in charge of developing community. Like, it's, we're all going to go down to the school football game or the Mom's Booster Club and the PTA and all those things that we think define our community are artificial. Yeah. And so if you go out and build your own communities, real communities, that you'll be amazed that the education aspect of it just follows.
Yeah. So it won't seem so much like a burden. Well, please go ahead and just give us your contact information as well.
All right. So if you want to find me online, you can visit me at freemarketeducators.org. We're also on Facebook, Free Market Educators. We're on Instagram at freemarketedu and on Twitter at freemarketedu. You can honestly reach out to us through any of those channels. If you prefer to email, I'll just give you my personal email because it's a little bit easier, is thomaspbogle@gmail.com. Shoot me an email. Let me know maybe if this is something you want to learn more about. Maybe this is something you'd like to get involved in. Definitely a growing community, and I'm always looking for people who would be happy to contribute. So.
Well, I could talk to you all day. I still have a zillion questions, but maybe we'll have to have you back on when you have other exciting news going on.
We'll talk again in a couple weeks.
Awesome. Okay. Again, his contact information is freemarketeducators.org. You can reach him at his email, which is thomaspbogle@gmail.com. But we will be sure to link all the information is Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all of that up on our website as well. But thank you so much for coming on with us, Thomas, and discussing this really important information and helping to light our minds on fire. I so appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind. To learn more about Thomas Bogle, go to our show notes at theluminousmind.net. Be sure to become a subscriber to our free email list. Then check out the services tab to see how we can continue to assist you, our fire starters. Also, to help us continue production of illuminating content, go to the sponsor tab at theluminousmind.net for more information on sponsorship and affiliate programs. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, Google+, Pinterest, and now Instagram. Get our free audio content by subscribing on YouTube, iTunes, and Stitcher. To help us grow, consider these easy ways. Tell your friends about us, leave us a review, share our content. Tell us how we can help you so together we can continue to light minds on fire and change the paradigm of education.